As the blacksmith takes a bar of iron and by fire changes its fashion, so we have changed our nature. We are no longer women, we are men. This was the fearsome chant of the Agojie, the real-life all-female army of West Africa, a sisterhood of warriors so formidable they inspired the Dora Milaje in Marvel's Black Panther and the epic film The Woman King. But who were these women really, beyond the legend? Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're diving deep into the true, complex, and bloody story of the female warriors of Dahomey. They were a military force that stunned 19th-century colonial armies, a symbol of female power in a brutal world, and the elite enforcers of a kingdom built on conquest and the slave trade. To understand these warriors, we first have to understand the kingdom that created them. The Kingdom of Dahomey, located in modern-day Benin, was one of the most organized and powerful states in West Africa for nearly 300 years. Its founding story perfectly captures its character. In the early 1600s, a prince named Dahomean wanted land from a local chief named Dan. When Dan mockingly refused, saying, "Should I open my belly for you to build your house inside?" Dahomean attacked, killed him, and built his palace right there. He declared his kingdom would be built in the belly of Dan, or Dahomey, which Europeans corrupted into Dahomey. From its very inception, Dahomey's identity was forged in violence and conquest. The kingdom was an absolute monarchy. The king, called the ahosi, was considered a semi-divine figure who held the power of life and death over every subject. His primary duty was to make Dahomey always greater, a mandate that required constant warfare. And this warfare was fueled by a terrifying economic engine, the transatlantic slave trade. In the 1720s, King Agojie conquered the coastal ports, giving Dahomey direct access to European traders. What the Europeans wanted most was people. Dahomey's army would wage war every year, capturing thousands from neighboring tribes. These captives were traded for firearms, gunpowder, and alcohol. This created a deadly feedback loop called the gun slave cycle. More guns allowed for the capture of more people, which were traded for even more guns, fueling endless expansion. War became the kingdom's main economic activity, and the Agojie were born from this crucible of conflict. So how did an all-female army even come to exist? The exact origin is debated. One theory traces them to a group of elite female elephant hunters called the Ghezo, who proved their courage and skill in the 17th century. Another theory suggests they began as a simple palace guard. The royal palace was home to thousands of women, and by tradition, no man besides the king could be there after dark. This created a need for an internal female police force. But most historians agree it was King Agojie, the same king who conquered the coast in the 1720s, who first used women in large-scale combat. Facing high casualties in his male army, he made a pragmatic choice. He armed the disciplined women of his palace and sent them to the front lines. They proved to be terrifyingly effective. However, it was King Ghezo, who reigned from 1818 to 1858, who truly perfected the Agojie and made them central to the state. He expanded their ranks from a few hundred to an estimated 6,000 warriors, making them a full third of the entire Dahomean army. Ghezo understood their strategic value. Unlike male generals from powerful families who might have their own ambitions, the Agojie were fanatically loyal to him and him alone. They owed their entire existence, their power, and their prestige to the king. They became his ultimate tool of power. Becoming an Agojie was a complete transformation. Recruits came from all over. Some were volunteers, ambitious women seeking power and autonomy outside of traditional marriage. Many were conscripts, with each family in the kingdom required to offer a daughter as a tax to the state. Others were captives from wars who were deemed strong enough to be turned from enemies into loyal soldiers. And sometimes, a husband could complain that his wife was too unruly, and she could be forcibly conscripted as a punishment, a way to tame her spirit. Once chosen, a recruit's old life was over. She began a brutal training regimen designed to strip away her identity and remake her as a warrior. Physically, they endured grueling exercises. Most famously, they were forced to charge barefoot over massive barriers of razor-sharp acacia thorns, a test of pure mental fortitude, where showing pain meant public humiliation. They trained relentlessly with their weapons, the heavy, inaccurate flintlock muskets of the era, and their iconic sidearm, a heavy razor-sharp machete called a gudagba. But the most important training was psychological. Recruits were systematically desensitized to violence. In a chilling ritual known as the test of insensitivity, they might be ordered to execute a helpless prisoner of war, sometimes by throwing them from a high platform. This proved they had shed all pity and were capable of the ruthlessness the state required. Central to their identity was their unique status. All Agojie were legally considered ahosi, or wives of the king. For the vast majority, this was a legal fiction, not a romantic one. This status mandated absolute celibacy. The penalty for breaking this vow was death, for both the warrior and her partner. This ensured their sole focus was the state. But this royal marriage also gave them immense power. They lived in the palace, were provided for by the state, and enjoyed luxuries like tobacco and alcohol. When they walked in public, a servant girl would run ahead ringing a bell, a signal for everyone to clear the path, turn their backs, and look away. To even accidentally touch an Agojie was a capital offense. They were a third gender in Dahomean society, not men, but no longer ordinary women, existing in a privileged space defined by their loyalty to the king and their martial prowess. By the mid-19th century, they were a highly organized force. They had female generals, like the Gundame and the Yewe, who were counterparts to the highest-ranking male commanders. The corps was divided into regiments. The Gulahento were the riflewomen, the infantry backbone. The Gohento were archers, a more traditional unit. But the most feared were the Nyekplahento, whose name meant the Reapers. They were the close-quarters specialists who charged in after the musket volley, wielding their machetes to sow terror and take heads as trophies, a key part of Dahomey's psychological warfare. For decades, their bravery and ferocity made them the terror of West Africa. But in the late 19th century, they would face an enemy that courage alone could not defeat. The scramble for Africa had begun, and the French Colonial Empire had its sights set on Dahomey. In 1889, a new king, Behanzin, took the throne. He was fiercely anti-colonial and refused to bow to French demands for his territory. He knew war was coming and began buying modern German rifles and cannons to arm his soldiers. The First Franco-Dahomean War broke out in 1890. At the Battle of Cotonou, the Dahomean army, with the Agojie in the lead, charged the French positions with incredible bravery. But they were met with a storm of steel from weapons they had never seen before, label-repeating rifles and Hotchkiss machine guns. A French officer described the scene. "They came straight at us, with incredible courage. Our machine guns mowed them down." The courage of the Amazons was powerless against our modern weapons. Despite suffering horrific losses, they attacked again and again, shocking the French with their resolve. That war ended in a tense stalemate, but it was just a prelude. In 1892, the French returned with a larger professional invasion force, commanded by the brilliant Colonel Alfred Amédée Dodds. What followed was a brutal war of conquest. Dodds's strategy was a slow, methodical advance toward the capital, Dahomey. The Dahomean army, including at least 2,000 Agojie, fought a desperate, heroic defense of their homeland. In battle after battle, the Agojie were always in the vanguard. A French legionnaire wrote of his shock, "Suddenly, a mass of furies fell upon us." They were the famous Amazons. Dressed in blue, their heads shaven, they fought with the rage of demons. The fighting was a brutal melee of bayonets against machetes. But each time, superior French firepower broke the Dahomean charges. At the final battle for the sacred city of Cana, the last line of defense, the Agojie fought to the last woman. French soldiers later reported finding the bodies of Agojie warriors who had chained themselves to their machine guns to prevent any thought of retreat. Their dedication was absolute, but it led to their near annihilation. By the time the French marched into the burned-out capital of Dahomey, only a few hundred Agojie were left alive. King Behanzin was captured and exiled. The French formally disbanded the Agojie, stripping the survivors of their status, their purpose, and their sisterhood. The last known veteran, a woman named Nawi, died in 1979, a living link to this lost world of warriors. So what is their legacy today? It's profoundly complex. On one hand, they are celebrated as feminist icons, a sisterhood that shattered patriarchal norms to achieve power and autonomy. They are heroes of anti-colonial resistance who fought to the death for their kingdom's independence. This is the image that inspires the Dora Milaje and gave us the Woman King. But there is an uncomfortable truth at the heart of their story. Their empowerment was forged in service to a militaristic state whose economy was built on the capture and sale of other Africans. They were the elite shock troops of slave raids. They weren't fighting for abstract freedom, they were fighting to preserve a system that enslaved others. They are not simple heroes or villains. They were both symbols of female strength and instruments of imperial brutality. The story of the Agojie teaches us that history is rarely simple. It shows that women have always held diverse and powerful roles, but that this power can be tied to systems we now find morally horrifying. They were real women who navigated a brutal world, leaving behind a story of courage, contradiction, and a fierce sisterhood that continues to fascinate and challenge us to this day. So what are your thoughts on this? Let us know down in the comments. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.